at length on the science course at the Tredgold Women's College. She had already matriculated into London University from school. She came of age, and she bickered with her aunt for latchkey privileges on the strength of that and her season ticket. Shamefaced curiosities began to come back into her mind, thinly disguised as literature and art. She read voraciously, and presently, because of her aunt's censorship, she took to smuggling any books she thought might be prohibited instead of bringing them home openly, and she went to the theatre whenever she could produce an acceptable friend to accompany her. She passed her general science examination with double honours and specialized in science. She happened to have an acute sense of form and unusual mental lucidity, and she found in biology, and particularly in comparative anatomy, a very considerable interest, albeit the illumination it cast upon her personal life was not altogether direct. She dissected well, and in a year she found herself chafing at the limitations of the lady Bachelor of Science, who retailed a store of faded learning in the Tredgold laboratory. She had already realized that this instructress was hopelessly wrong and foggy. It is the test of the good comparative anatomist upon the skull. She discovered a desire to enter as a student in the Imperial College at Westminster, where Russell taught, and go on with her work at the fountainhead. She had asked about that already, and her father had replied evasively, "We'll have to see about that, little V. We'll have to see about that." In that posture of being seen about the matter hung until she seemed committed to another session at the Tredgold College, and in the meantime a small conflict arose and brought the latchkey question, and in fact the question of Ann Veronica's position generally, to an acute issue. In addition to the various businessmen, solicitors, civil servants, and widow ladies who lived in the Morningside Park Avenue, there was a certain family of alien sympathies and artistic quality, the Widgetts, with which Ann Veronica had become very friendly. Mr. Widgett was a journalist and art critic, addicted to a greenish-grey tweed suit and art-brown ties. He smoked corncob pipes in the Avenue on Sunday morning, travelled third class to London by unusual trains, and openly despised golf. He occupied one of the smaller houses near the station. He had one son, who had been co-educated, and 3 daughters with peculiarly jolly red hair that Ann Veronica found adorable. 2 of these had been her particular intimates at the high school, and had done much to send her mind exploring beyond the limits of the available literature at home. It was a cheerful, irresponsible, shamelessly hard-up family in the key of faded green and flattened purple, and the girls went on from the high school to the Fadden Art School, and a bright, eventful life of art student dances, socialist meetings, theatre galleries, talking about work, and even, at intervals, work. And ever and again they drew Ann Veronica from her sound, persistent industry into the circle of these experiences. They had asked her to come to the first of the 2 great annual Fadden dances, the October one, and Ann Veronica had accepted with enthusiasm. And now her father said she must not go. He had put his foot down and said she must not go. Going involved 2 things that all Ann Veronica's tact had been ineffectual to conceal from her aunt and father. Her usual dignified reserve had availed her nothing. One point was that she was to wear fancy dress in the likeness of a Corsair's bride, and the other was that she was to spend whatever vestiges of the night remained after the dance was over in London with the Widgett girls and a select party in quite a decent little hotel near Fitzroy Square. "But, my dear," said Ann Veronica's aunt. "You see," said Ann Veronica, with the air of one who shares a difficulty, "I've promised to go. I didn't realize. I don't see how I can get out of it now." Then it was her father issued his ultimatum. He had conveyed it to her, not verbally, but by means of a letter, which seemed to her a singularly ignoble method of prohibition. "He couldn't look me in the face and say it," said Ann Veronica. "But of course it's aunt's doing, really." And thus it was that as Ann Veronica neared the gates of home she said to herself, "I'll have it out with him somehow. I'll have it out with him, and if he won't—" But she did not give even unspoken words to the alternative at that time. Part 3. Ann Veronica's father was a solicitor with a good deal of company business, a lean, trustworthy, worried-looking, neuralgic, clean-shaven man of 53, with a hard mouth, a sharp nose, iron-grey hair, grey eyes, gold-framed glasses, and a small, circular baldness at the crown of his head. His name was Peter. He had had 5 children at irregular intervals, of whom Ann Veronica was the youngest, so that as a parent he came to her perhaps a little practised and jaded and inattentive, and he called her his little V, and patted her unexpectedly and disconcertingly, and treated her promiscuously as of any age between 11 and 28. The city worried him a good deal, and what energy he had left over he spent partly in golf, a game he treated very seriously, and partly in the practices of microscopic petrography. He went in for microscopy in the unphilosophical Victorian manner as his hobby. A birthday present of a microscope had turned his mind to technical microscopy when he was 18, and a chance friendship with a Holborn microscope dealer had confirmed that bent. He had remarkably skilful fingers and a love of detailed processes, and he had become one of the most dexterous amateur makers of rock sections in the world. He spent a good deal more money and time than he could afford upon the little room at the top of the house, in producing new lapidary apparatus and new microscopic accessories, and rubbing down slices of rock to a transparent thinness, and mounting them in a beautiful and dignified manner. He did it, he said, to distract his mind. His chief successes he exhibited to the Lowndean Microscopical Society, where their high technical merit never failed to excite admiration. Their scientific value was less considerable, since he chose rocks entirely with a view to their difficulty of handling or their attractiveness at conversations when done. He had a great contempt for the sections the theorizers produced. They proved all sorts of things perhaps, but they were thick, unequal, pitiful pieces of work. Yet an indiscriminating, wrong-headed world gave such fellows all sorts of distinctions. He read but little, and that chiefly healthy light fiction with chromatic titles, The Red Sword, The Black Helmet, The Purple Robe, also in order to distract his mind. He read it in winter in the evening after dinner, and Ann Veronica associated it with the tendency to monopolize the lamp and to spread a very worn pair of dappled fawn-skin slippers across the fender. She wondered occasionally why his mind needed so much distraction. His favourite newspaper was The Times, which he began at breakfast in the morning, often without manifest irritation, and carried off to finish in the train, leaving no other paper at home. It occurred to Ann Veronica once that she had known him when he was younger, but day had followed day, and each had largely obliterated the impression of its predecessor. But she certainly remembered that when she was a little girl he sometimes wore tennis flannels, and also rode a bicycle very dexterously in through the gates to the front door. And in those days, too, he used to help her mother with her gardening, and hover about her while she stood on the ladder and hammered creepers to the scullery wall. It had been Ann Veronica's lot as the youngest child to live in a home that became less animated and various as she grew up. Her mother had died when she was 13. Her 2 much older sisters had married off, one submissively, one insubordinately. Her 2 brothers had gone out into the world well ahead of her, and so she had made what she could of her father. But he was not a father one could make much of. His ideas about girls and women were of a sentimental and modest quality. They were creatures, he thought, either too bad for a modern vocabulary, and then frequently most undesirably desirable, or too pure and good for life. He made the simple classification of a large and various sex to the exclusion of all intermediate kinds. He held that the 2 classes had to be kept apart, even in thought, and remote from one another. Women are made like the potter's vessels, either for worship or contumely, and are withal fragile vessels. He had never wanted daughters. Each time a daughter had been born to him, he had concealed his chagrin with great tenderness and effusion from his wife, and had sworn unwontedly and with passionate sincerity in the bathroom. He was a manly man, free from any strong maternal strain, and he had loved his dark-eyed, dainty, bright-coloured, and active little wife with a real vein of passion in his sentiment. But he had always felt, he had never allowed himself to think of it, that the promptitude of their family